You are listening to Leading the Factory Forward with your host, Lynn Friest. We share interviews with manufacturing experts and strategies for embracing the digital future, recruiting a new workforce, finding new business. Lynn is an advanced manufacturing strategist and leadership consultant who is on a mission to show manufacturing leaders how to improve their current operations while preparing for a digital future. And here's your host, Lynn Friest.
Welcome to this episode of Leading the Factory Forward. In our recent episodes, we've been talking about conversations in business and effective meetings, but now I want to share some ideas about an even more important conversation, the ones we have with our children. So in this post, I'm going to share a summary of Paul Axtell's book, 10 Powerful Things to Say to Your Kids, Creating the Relationships You Want with the Most Important People in Your Life. While I and others first learned about Paul's ideas on conversation in a corporate setting, when I was in those seminars, I was always amazed at how during a 2-day session, how many people came back on the second day, having tried out some of these ideas at home the night before, were amazed at the results in terms of their conversation and their listening. So again, while some of this may have been introduced in the corporate setting, it certainly applies to our home life as well. So what are these 10 powerful things? The first one is, I like you. The second one, you are a fast learner. The third one, thank you. The fourth one is, how about we agree to? The fifth one is, tell me more. 6 is, let's read. 7, we all make mistakes. Number 8, I'm sorry. Number 9, what do you think? And number 10, yes. So I'll go into a little more depth on 5 of these phrases, but some general notes. Conversation is how we make meaning for both ourselves and our kids, and we've talked about this in conversations about business. Paul begins his book by saying, your words and conversations create your reality, your future, and your relationships. What you talk about or don't talk about defines your relationships. He goes on to say, your view of the world is shaped by language and conversation, and by extension, that is true of your children also. So, getting started in the book, he says, what do our kids often hear from us? And he has a list that he found from another source of 30 statements of what our kids hear most often from us. Now, I'll just share a few of those, but the number 1 statement is no. Another is, don't give me those excuses. Third is, I don't have time now, maybe later. Do you think I'm made out of money? Just wait until you have kids of your own. What in the world do you think you are doing? So, certainly I have used those phrases, and I'm sure you have too. So, how often are our responses, especially with problems or when we are stressed, not supportive or negative, or basically help our children clam up rather than open up? And we know that our intention is trying to do the best to help our children both be safe and to grow. Now, Paul starts by suggesting we think about these 5 questions. Again, what would your children say they hear from you most often? How do you respond to problems? There's an example I learned is about spilled milk. What's your immediate reaction when your child spills the milk at the dinner table versus what's your reaction when a guest spills the milk at the dinner table? I bet they might be, at least at first glance, a little different. What do you want your children to learn from you? Again, you are teaching them each and every day. Are you intentional about what you're teaching them? What do you want your children to think about themselves? Do you want to think they're unsuccessful, they're failures, or do you want to think that they have the ability to grow? And then finally, what do you want your children to know about you? So just to begin with, take a pause before you speak and make a choice about what to say whenever you can. In another quote from Paul's book, he says, 20 years from now, what do you want your kids to remember hearing from you? And actually, from my experience and talking with my parents, they were often surprised at what we remembered they said. They'd forgotten all about it, but it had an impact on us and we remembered it. So the statements I'm going into a little more in depth just to give you a flavor of the book. First one is, you are a fast learner. Now, this will be a key skill for the future. And in fact, I often suggest to manufacturing leaders looking for new talent, look for people with curiosity. Now, children know how to do this all the time. They get completely engrossed in even simple tasks as they're learning, whether it's open and close, or it's doing something over and over. I often remember in my daughter, we watched Cinderella, I don't know how many times, over and over again. But again, that's how children are learning, so be mindful of that. Children are also great mimics in trying to learn. And so the question might be for you, what are you modeling for them? And then we need to let children figure out how to do something. Again, they have to learn how to walk. We can't walk for them. Likewise with many other things, tying shoes. We can show them how, we can demonstrate, but in the end, they do have to practice tying their shoes. Now, we can, as parents, be mindful of distractions like TV or our electronic devices that can get in the way of children really focusing and practicing something. If the TV is on, they're easily distracted from a piece of work they were trying to do, whether it was practicing tying their shoes or something else. So when it's missing, or when we're not following through on this, we can be over-teaching or showing our children how to do something, and then possibly we could be critical when they fail. So it's the idea of let them learn, let them make mistakes, but encourage them because they are a fast learner. So again, some first steps on that one: express appreciation for how they are trying and learning, not just their success or failure. Applaud their practice on something. Again, being open to letting your child fail and try again. The next statement I want to explore was, tell me more. And this can work with teens as well as young children, even though it can be more challenging with teenagers. But we do need to be fully present when we're asking them to tell us, and we need not to interrupt them. We need to listen to them completely and fully. You also need to be asking open-ended questions, not just, did you have a good day? But instead, what was your favorite part of the day? Something that allows them to expand a little bit. And again, this may not happen on the first time you ask it. Be persistent. Conversely, don't bombard them with questions, especially teenagers. It should be an inquiry, not an interrogation. And then finally, the story I've used before, we want whole-face listening. They have to be aware that you are listening intently and fully to them and not just asking questions while you do something else. So when it's missing, we normally end up with one-word answers or simply silence, and that doesn't help building our relationships with our kids. So a couple of questions that Paul suggests to get started. What did you notice at school today? What do you like about our house or neighborhood? And if you're not ready to talk now, I'll be ready to listen when you are ready to talk. The next one is, we all make mistakes. Life is a series of problems. Problems are normal. Everyone has them. Think about, how can I be easy to talk to? And remember, as a parent, your voice is figuratively and often literally louder. So you need to say, how can you present an open, an inquiry tone of voice rather than the judgmental tone of voice? And then I think it's useful to let your kids see you make a mistake and see how you handle it. I remember one of our kids' preschool teachers said, they assume that you do everything perfectly because that's how they see it. So sometimes it's helpful for them to understand that, no, you make mistakes too. And again, some of this is natural for kids. They learn by making mistakes, obviously. But if you've ever watched kids in video games and different things, they fail often and keep going over and over. So you do want to encourage them. I won't say encourage them to make mistakes, but encourage them to keep learning things. Now, in the end, you do want them to avoid any, I'll say, permanent mistakes. So when some of this is missing, kids are afraid to talk with you and share their mistakes. They're afraid to open up with you because they'll feel you'll judge them or you'll criticize them. So a couple ideas to get started on this one. Share with your children a mistake you made at work. They may not understand it. You can give them a little bit of context to what happened. And then obviously listen without judging when your child has made a mistake. Instead of telling them what they did wrong, ask them what they have learned. What have they learned having done this? The next question or statement is, what do you think? Again, talking things out is how we make meaning for ourselves. Certainly for me as a coach, I often provide for my clients just space, a safe space to talk out loud and make meaning for themselves and for ourselves in general. That's how we make meaning in our families. When you ask this question of what do you think, be leaning in when you ask it. Be in deep listening mode. Don't have a judging tone or appearance. If you remember from our Difficult Conversations podcast, the idea of what are your interests in this, not simply your positions. When it's missing, we are, once again, left with one-word responses and a general silence. And what's even worse is we really don't know what they think. And we haven't given them a chance to talk out loud and do some sense-making from their perspective. An alternative is to go really deep into the question, tell me what you want. Keep peeling back the layers of the onion. Don't stop with the first response. What do they really want in some issue? Again, 5 whys that we use from our lean manufacturing. Keep drilling down into that question and see what they have to say. I'm sure you'll find richer responses as you go farther. Again, without being judgmental or forceful, just keep asking why and what do you want. And then finally, be open to whatever they say. Again, later on, you could find a way that say, my perspective on this is a little different. But don't be too quick to share your opinion. Let them really get out and speak fully to the question or the idea that they have. Our final statement is yes. Now, no is the most common response that kids heard, and no can be the quick and the easy way out of a question or a concern that your child has. You don't want no conversations to dominate your relationship. If you remember again, back to some of our talk on relationships and conversation, your relationship may be strongly flavored by your last 5 conversations. If they're all no conversations, maybe you should try to think about, is there something we could talk about more in a more neutral sense? Now, it's okay to say no. Kids do appreciate knowing where the guardrails are or the boundaries are. And obviously, if this whole thing is missing, there's never any yeses. Life with a constant battle of no's is simply no fun. And I think we've all had some experience in that with teenagers or even toddlers. So what are some of the first steps? Think about where there might have been options to offer instead of a simple no. Are there other things you could have considered? And when a no is still needed, maybe explain your reasoning a little more. Give the background. What is your interest in this whole thing? Why you said no? Is it because of their safety? Is it because you want them to do something different to help them out? So just explain your reasoning a little more. So that represents the 5 statements I wanted to cover. Again, Paul's book has much more rich content in it. He covers all 10 things much more in detail. But quick review, what do our kids actually often hear from us? They hear no. They hear, I don't have time now, maybe later. What in the world were you doing? But now let's start thinking about what could we be saying to our children instead. You are a fast learner. Tell me more. We all make mistakes. What do you think? And yes. So again, I highly recommend the book, 10 Powerful Things to Say to Your Kids by Paul Axtell, and there'll be a link to it in the show notes. Now, in our next series of podcasts, we're going to shift back to the factory, and we're going to talk about some things like digital leadership and Industry 4.0. It will be how can leaders build their awareness and perspectives on leading as we approach the digital age and Industry 4.0. Thank you.